As you saw in the selections you just read from John Stuart Mill's book, Utilitarianism, Mill appeals to a distinction between higher and lower pleasures. This distinction plays an important role in Mill's philosophy, as it grounds Mill's response to a key objection to his view. To set up this objection and Mill's response, we need to remember what Mill's version of utilitarianism says. At the beginning of the selections that you read, Mill states the core of his view, the greatest happiness principle, as he calls it, as follows. Actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. By happiness is intended pleasure in the absence of pain, by unhappiness, pain and the privation of pleasure. One objection to this view, which Mill anticipates, says that utilitarianism is a degrading view of human existence. If utilitarianism were correct, then human actions would be properly evaluated only by looking at how much pleasure they produce and how much pain they prevent. But surely the purpose of human existence isn't simply the acquisition of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. If that were the purpose of human existence, then our lives would be no more elevated than the lives of pigs, who are entirely consumed by the pleasures of rolling around in the mud and digging their noses in the dirt. To respond to this worry, Mill claims that not all pleasures are created equal. Some pleasures are more valuable than others. That is, they're higher pleasures. Mill maintains that when estimating the value of a pleasure, we should attend not only to the quantity of the pleasure, for example, how long it lasts or how intense it is, but we must also attend to the quality of the pleasure. What does Mill mean by the quality of the pleasure? Well, Mill says the following. If I'm asked what I mean by difference of quality in pleasures, or what makes one pleasure more valuable than another, merely as a pleasure, except its being greater in amount, there is but one possible answer. Of two pleasures, if there be one to which all or almost all who have experience of both give a decided preference, irrespective of any feeling of moral obligation to prefer it, that is the more desirable pleasure. To understand Mill's idea here, let's take an example. Suppose that we're trying to decide which of the following pleasures is more valuable. The pleasure of receiving a massage from a skilled masseuse, or the pleasure of thinking about the ethics of eating. Mill says that to figure out which of these pleasures is more valuable, we must look to which of the two pleasures is preferred by people who have experienced both. If all or almost all of the people who have experienced both the pleasure of a great massage and the pleasure of thinking about the ethics of eating prefer one of these to the other, then the one that is preferred is the higher or more valuable pleasure. This test, which is sometimes referred to as the informed preference test, has been the focus of a significant amount of scholarly discussion. We won't have time to dive into the issues surrounding the informed preference test in much depth, though we've included pointers to more information below. But I do want to make one observation about this test and what it says about the relative values of human and non-human pleasures. The observation is this. The informed preference test doesn't obviously imply that humans ever experience pleasures that are more valuable than the pleasures that non-human animals experience. And the reason why is simple. The informed preference test says that to figure out which of two pleasures is higher or more valuable, you must look at which of these two pleasures is preferred by somebody who's experienced both. But no being experiences things both as a human does and as a pig does. So there's no person who's acquainted both with human pleasures and pig pleasures. This is important because it means that even if Mill's informed preference test does allow us in some circumstances to determine which of two pleasures is the higher, the informed preference test would not provide us with reason to believe that the pleasures of non-human animals count for less or are less valuable than the pleasures that humans experience. Of course, a defender of Mill could come back and say that we humans do experience pleasures of the same kind that non-human animals experience. And so, we are just the kind of informed observer that can decide whether the pleasures of philosophy are higher than the pleasures that a pig may experience. You might think, for example, that our bodily pleasures are sufficiently similar to the bodily pleasures of pigs that we can confidently judge whether they are lower pleasures than, say, the pleasures of thinking about the ethics of eating. Whether this response succeeds depends on how similar our pleasures are to the pleasures of non-human animals, and whether we're in a position to know whether those pleasures are similar or not. The less confident that we are that there is a significant resemblance between our bodily pleasures and the bodily pleasures of pigs, the less confident we should be that thinking about the ethics of eating is more valuable than rolling around in the mud.